Alright, who we got last? Polar Knight. This guy's interesting. Okay, that's bothering me too now. So, let's see. Let's make us a reference. I definitely don't need all of those. Yeah. Alright. So what is Polar Knight? Polar Knight's an interesting fellow. He's basically a heavyweight. But he's not as much a grappler in the sense that he wants to be up in your face. He's a grappler who cares about where you're standing, and he wants you on certain spaces, right? Like, he's going to put spikes down, and then he wants to get you on them, and then he pops the spikes, like, he, slams you onto them, basically, is the idea, and he gets bonus power, which is quite good. +2 power is good. Just doing some positioning requirements to make it work is important for making it halfway sane. But +2 power is good. Let's look at these cards. Carl's power budget is 99% fear, 1% coffee mug. Nice set. Alright. So this is interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of the Shovel Knight characters are going to have this kind of weird spread where it's like, it's hard to gauge everything. Let's start with the easy ones. This, deceptively low. So 10207, above curve at range 2, that's super important. Hit push 2. At range 2 it beats sweep. Super important. 0 power. Alright. This is a defensive tool. It's a very good defensive tool. It's a Shoryuken, basically. It's a, you try to attack me at a regular speed, then I'll punch you really fast and push you away. And it's for safety. But it doesn't have much value as an attack, honestly. The boost is good, but the boost is not amazing because he already has good ranges on his cards, so he doesn't actually need reach. It's nice when the opponent thinks that they're, backing up out of the range of whatever it is they're afraid of. You go, actually I have one more range than you thought. But overall, like, an important defensive threat that often will make people kind of play scared of it. But when they play scared of it, they play things that are still pretty reliable and that you don't especially have good ways to punish, at least for most of the game. So I actually don't think it's super important I don't think it's a super important component in what his power budget is devoted to. Yes, and here's the other one. Before close 2, speed 5. Alright, on curve, that's an assault. Hit, draw a card, push up to 2. Okay, so you draw a card, push up to 2, draw a card for each ice spike the opponent's push onto. Alright, so instead of gaining advantage and doing 4 damage, you are potentially, like, you're drawing at least 1 card and potentially up to 3. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Not really impressive. Like, if you do push them onto an ice spike, then that's 5 power, which is nice. It does pop on your ice spike, so like you're consuming some of this ability, but it's fine. If you're in Exceed mode, it does 6, but again, that's not really hitting a big break point. It's just, it's pretty good. Pretty underwhelming. Honestly, probably more underwhelming than Stomp. The big thing about this, though, is that it has, I think, a more important boost on it. Placing ice spikes onto any 2 spaces means you can put it in the opponent's space, which there are going to be times that you cannot force your opponent out of position no matter what you do. So this is one of the only ways you have to force an ice spike into their space. There are 2 other ways I'm going to talk about, but that is actually super important. So I consider this to be rather more important in his overall, like, game plan. No matter how he wants to approach his game plan, his plan is put spike under opponent, hit opponent. So that helps. That goes a long way. The other 2 ways I should mention now are his Exceed, which is when you exceed, place ice spikes on 3 different spaces, so you can put them on the opponent at that time. And then the other, technically, he could also do it with this if he wants to the edge of the arena. That's conditional, so I don't care about that. The other way is Avalanche. There is an after on Shovel Slam to place an ice spike in a space adjacent to you. I don't count that as much. Like, I'm talking about where you are guaranteed to have the opponent in the space and place the spike, right? So this says there's a spike in your space now. This says there's a spike in your space now. This says there's a spike in your space now, and also I'm doing something, which is actually extremely valuable. This is going to go a little bit higher up on his scale. That boosts specifically avalanche, not the attack. So those are the other ways he can put spikes in the opponent's space. Like he can use this after, or he can use this before. I just wanted to mention this because I was talking about how important that is. He has a limited supply of them. All right. Let's keep looking at these attacks. What is probably next? So we got a sweep that hits the entire board. This one is, well, not quite the entire board, but it's speed 2, 6 guard, 5 power. That's a sweep. Does less damage for each ice spike between you and the opponent. That's obviously not good, but it means if you've consumed a bunch of spikes, it's fine. It's 5 power, maybe more if they're at the edge, and you can slide an ice spike into their space. And it's after close 3. That's actually pretty important. Oh, and it has overpowerment, which is a great boost. Yeah, this is a strong card. This is like kind of everything you want to see on a card. Both sides of it are great. It's all around reliable, has good numbers, has an extra effect that happens sometimes, and then after close 3 means he's going to get up in your face, so it's his anti-projectile tool. This is very good. Alright. It's a little hard to judge some of these. So, we got a sweep, we got an assault, like a bad assault. What is this card? This is a spike. It's a little bit weird as spikes go. So it's range 1, speed 1, but it says before advance 2 or 3. So it's not actually range 1, right? It's advance 2 or 3, so it's range 3 to 4? No. 2 to 4. Yeah, 2 to 4. So that's kind of interesting. The hit, push, or pull is actually pretty valuable because it makes it easier for him to use his ability. Opponents cannot move you is interesting because it means you can't get pushed back by certain types of annoying projectiles. It's not relevant to, like, normally that's for countering grasp, but it's definitely not relevant here because the advanced 2 or 3 means this does not hit grasp unless you reach. So the other odd thing here is it's ignore armor, but it's speed 1, which means it is specifically a block crusher, right? Like, and it's a block crusher that only has 3 power, so you need to power up with your character ability or something else for it to actually be useful. So this is an important tool, or an important threat for him to have at certain points, especially late game, because it means blocking is not as safe. But the boost is far, far, far stronger. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that boost up here. Shovel Slam. Alright, this is a force special, so that should already set off a warning bell, meaning this card is important. Like, it's either a force special so that you can invalidate it to have a more consistent deck and better wild swings, or because you need to have a card in your discard pile for some reason, or because it's just that good. Speed 4, range 1 to 3. Doesn't have any movement, so it's under curve. So it's mid-speed. 3 guard. Okay, so it's a mid-speed that can deal with grasp. 5 power. So far we're not seeing anything particularly flashy about this. Hit effect, yeah, so hit effect ordering does not let you pop 2 spikes. His character ability specifies that the hit effect lets him remove a spike is on his attack. It's not on the spike itself. Like, the spike itself has no relevant text. It's just you can't have more than one in space, and when you would place one, you can instead move one. So he cannot pop 2 spikes in a single strike. All right, so what makes this card a force special? Hit, you may remove an ice spike from its space adjacent to the opponent's pushable 1. That's okay, but that feels counterproductive, right? It's like, oh, there's a spike next to them, so I'll remove it to pull them. Wait, now the spike is gone, so what was the point? Like, it's only useful if you have one on both sides, so you can remove this one and push them away. The after is nice. Like I mentioned earlier, like, you know, that can put a spike in the opponent's base. That's pretty nice. But nothing about this attack seems important, right? Like, why is this a force special? It's actually a very good answer for that, which is this. His Exceed hits +3 power. This is a speed 4 attack that deals with Grasp. That becomes 8 power, which means this crushes focus. Like, you have to be Exceeded, you have to have a spike in his base, you have to be willing to pay the force. But all things considered, this is not all that unsafe an attack, and if they're crossing out, you do have answers to cross. So this is actually deceptively good. Like, it loses to a defensive assault. People almost never play assault at range 1, especially on defense. So you can throw this, and especially if you have the EX, you can throw this at close range and just deal a ton of damage. So this is a force special because it hits that magic breakpoint of 7 damage on front side, 8 damage in Exceed mode. At a speed that's high enough to matter, right? Like, this can hit that, but it's harder. And then he doesn't have any other decent printed power except on this Ultra over here. So, in spite of that, like, that's an important threshold, but it's not as reliable, it's not as important as Avalanche, and it's not as reliable as Polar Plow or just having Overpower. Overpower is really, really good. So it definitely goes below those in terms of how much it contributes to his overall power budget. The boost Advanced Retreat up 6 is great. On the other hand, he already has After Close 3 on Polar Plow, so he does not, like, he has 2 sources of closing movements. This one is obviously much stronger, but I still don't think it overcomes, like, he doesn't need it that much, and I don't think it overcomes how important these cards are. So, Shovel Slam is a tier lower, in my opinion, than Polar Plow and Shovel Drop. Alright. Oh yeah, y'all might recognize the Advanced Retreat up 6 as being similar to the Headlong Rung that was in Carl Swanji's kit, which said Close 6. Or Close Up 6, excuse me. This one has a drawback to it, which is if you're running toward your opponent and you're running over ice spikes that you already have in play, it actually removes the first 2. So, like, it has a drawback to it, which is a little fairer, but like I said, Swanji really needs it. Alright. So now we got Ultras. Let's look at these things. When you're hit, spend any amount of force plus 2 armor before spent. That probably sounds really familiar, doesn't it? I believe this is the only time we have printed the text of block on something that isn't block. And I think this is actually something that makes Polar special. It's really, really interesting that he can just have more blocks than everybody else. The boost on this is the same thing, but it requires gauge instead of force, which means it's really just kind of a late game tool for when you already have a bunch of gauge built up. You don't want to play the attack because you need to make something else safe, like assaults or, you know, this card over here. So the boost I don't value very highly. The attack I actually think is fantastic. It's only 2 gauge, lets you have however much armor you want, puts itself in gauge, which is obviously also still a source of force for later, and it has a push effect on it, which means that it's easier to reposition opponents onto ice spikes. Because you definitely value being able to reposition opponents when, like, you can't place an ice spike directly under them normally. But honestly, I still don't think it's as important as these 2 cards. Overpower and Polar Plow are both super, super important, and then Avalanche is amazingly strong. So, alright, what about this thing? Icicle Drop. 1 to 8, so it hits everywhere. Power 8, speed 2, power 8, yes, speed 2, armor 2, stun immunity, 3 gauge, only hits the opponent's base with ice spike after advancing to 3. So it's yet another after movement effect that lets him get up closer to the opponent. It's got a little bit of armor, which is nice for survivability. It does a ton of damage. A little bit hard to set up. It's good. Like, it's not bad. Certainly I love this card. I like closing games with 10 plus damage, and this does that. This will do 10 or 11 damage. But, like, does it need it? Not really. What about the boost? Draw 2 cards, you may remove 1 or more ice spikes when you draw that many additional cards, add this to your gauge. That is fantastic. If you have ice spikes in awkward places, or under you, or, you know, wrong side of the board, or whatever, this converts them into card draw, and also this goes to your gauge, which helps accelerate your Exceed, or lets you afford your other Ultra, or, you know, the other copy of this. In fact, rebuild into Exceed, or Exceed into rebuilds, where you either drop the spikes and then you rebuild with them, or you rebuild to pick them up and then you Exceed to drop the spikes, is like a double-sided combo where it works in either direction, and that's just fantastic. This is up here. I'm not sure where I put it relative to these two. Probably just for the reload value, I would put it right up here, or like right in the middle. I still think it's probably less important than Avalanche, because Avalanche is a win the game button. But Avalanche requires you to have the gauge, and Beetle helps you get the gauge, so, you know, they feed into each other. Overpower is also a win the game button. These are really, really good. Alright, and then on Carl, I put his character ability up here, because it was really important to talk about how it interacts with stuff, and especially the Overload being his real character ability. Poor Knight, I didn't do that. Poor Knight's ability is basically hit +2 power or hit +3 power if you're in Exceed mode, which is great. And it's actually why he has, in some ways, a little bit lackluster specials, like 0 Printed Power, 3 Printed Power. You know, his Printed Power isn't very high on most of his attacks, except for the Ultra, and the 4 Special. So, this is to compensate for that. But it also means that your normals are unusually good, because normals are not balanced around that. Normals are the same for everybody. So you can have 8 power sweeps, which is pretty darn great. Yeah, it's essential to him. I would actually consider it, yeah, easily up here in terms of the whole character's balanced around it. If he didn't have this, he would be unplayably bad. And not just because so many cards interact with it, but because he just doesn't have the power to support a kit that doesn't just get +2 power when it needs it. Yeah. So yeah. These are his awkward cards in my opinion. Snow Slash is actually great. Serval Slam is actually great, but these are the cards that are like, oh, you gotta find the right time to use them. This is a boost you can play whenever you want, but it also doesn't do much by itself. And the attack is pretty darn mediocre. This is a solid defensive tool, and it has a good boost, but also it's a boost he doesn't really need, because he has plenty of range for the most part. And these are all great. Very solid character. I like Polar, he's a cool dude. I know, too easy.